Welcome again to another episode of I Can Do All Things. We are with the Holy Spirit Broadcasting Network, and I am your host, Martha Sanchez. Our core scripture is Philippians 4:13 that says, I can do all things through Christ who gives me strength. So just know that in 2025, no matter what you want to do, you can do all things through Him who gives you strength. I'm really excited today because I have an amazing guest. He is an author, a speaker, and a founder of Tag Talks. And we're going to talk and let you know how you can heal from your childhood traumas. And we all have them. So I know you have them out there too. So it's going to be a great episode. And I'd like to introduce you to my guest. His name is Raul Lopez Jr. Welcome, Raul.
Hello, thank you. Appreciate it. I'm happy, excited to be here.
Raul has written 8 books, and I have some of his books here, and I'd like for him to share with you a little bit about himself, and then we're going to talk a little bit about his books so that if you want, you can get these because they're going to really help you out. So, Raul, tell us a little bit about you, your kids, where you're at right now, what you're doing.
Okay. All right. My name is Raul Lopez Jr. As you stated, author, speaker, coach. I've written 8 books. The core books are titled Heal the Boy and the Man Will Appear. Here's one of them. I've written 2 versions of this book. The first version, the difference is the subtitle. And the first version is Learn the Importance of Understanding and Expressing Your Emotions. And the second one is Transforming Childhood Trauma with God and Psychology. A lot of lessons in the second versions. All of these books are available anywhere, Amazon, online, Barnes & Nobles. I also have a book series, a lot of self-development. Success Leaves Clues. This is one with Tony Robbins and his tips. I have one with Gary Vaynerchuk also. And then as a coach, I had my speaking forum, I have the Speaker's Blueprint. So I have a lot of contacts, everything you need in here to learn how to get paid to speak, put your talk together, so on and so forth. And then this is another book series, and this is my speaking forum tag, Transparency, Acceptance, and Growth. And what I do is I put our speakers who come out, I put them into this book. So when they're done with this, we help them put their coaching programs together, and they're authors, speakers, and coaches, sharing their wisdom.
And next weekend, as a matter of fact, on the 30th and 31st, we are both going to be in Carlsbad, and I'm going to be one of the tag speakers.
Martha's coming out to our Tag Talks Impact and Income event in Carlsbad, California. We're going to have an incredible 2 days of powerful speakers sharing stories, just really what we're doing here today. And then we're going to also help entrepreneurs grow their businesses, whether it be mindset, blocks, whatever it is that's stopping you, teaching you how to grow, come out of your comfort zone per se, and become the author, the speaker, and the coach.
Great. Well, don't forget to reach out to him. You will see his email at the bottom of our show, right there on the screen. Mm-hmm. So I'd like to start talking about your story because you have such an amazing testimony and story, and I think that by sharing you can help a lot of people. So let's go back all the way to when you were really young.
Okay.
And you were 7 years old, mm-hmm. and you found yourself in a car on your way to the airport, and all of a sudden in another country. Another state. Yeah, in another state.
Yeah.
You were in California, and your mom was taking you and took you to Alaska.
Alaska, correct. Yeah.
So tell us what happened.
Okay. So this all has to do with the title of my book, Heal the Boy and the Man Will Appear. That story is my life. And what you're talking about is, and I'll start even further back than 7, at age 0 to 7, I was, my mother and father were married. My mother brought 2 children to the marriage. My father brought 1, and then together they had me. And we had an incredible time growing up in San Jose, California. Siblings, mother, father, lots of love, lots of joy, lots of happiness. I was very close with my father. Just the bond, we were always together, wrestling, playing, having fun. And one day my mother comes home and she says, hey son, get in the car, we're gonna go for a ride. This was back in the 70s, so I'll date myself. This was back in the 70s, San Jose,
very
California. If you know California, Silicon Valley, it was not Silicon Valley back then. It was farms. It was farmland. That's how my family's originated there. But all of our family lived in like a 5-mile radius of us. So to get in the car and go for a ride with my mom was not a big deal. We were going to go to grandma's house or aunt's house, uncle's house, whatever it was. But this time we ended up at the airport, and I saw this big airplane. I was excited, 7 years old. Got on the plane with my mother and 2 of my siblings, and ended up in Alaska. Got out, snow and fun, excitement of just the travel. And then the next day I woke up and I looked over at my mom and I said, "Hey, Mom, where's my daddy?" And she looked down at me and she said, "Don't worry about your dad, son. You're not going to see him again." And it broke me. It really did break me. So
Right.
I'll go into some bullet points for time's sake, and then we can kind of go through it a little bit. But it broke me not understanding my emotions. That's why the title of my book is, the subtitle is Learn the Importance of Understanding and Expressing Your Emotions. Emotions are an energy. And it broke me, and I had all these negative emotions, sadness, frustration, confusion, just all of these things going through this little 7-year-old body, that it took me into a darkness. So that darkness led me to doing drugs by the time I was 9. At 13, I had my first child, and I was in a gang already. At 14, I got incarcerated. And then from there, between 14 and 24, I spent the majority of those years in some form of facility being made a ward of the court. They titled me as a menace to society, and they took me from my mother, and they put me in these different facilities, and then ended up in San Quentin prison. So just that childhood trauma that a lot of us don't know that we have. Like we're talking about the childhood trauma now, but I didn't know why all those things were happening to me, right? I always ask the 3 questions. Why do I do what I do? Why do I act the way that I act? And why do I feel the way that I felt?
Well, we're going to have to go back. That was a lot.
Yeah.
So you say with 2 siblings, you went to Alaska. Were you the oldest?
I was the youngest.
The youngest.
Yeah.
And were your other siblings talking to you about what was going on, or nobody was saying anything? Was your mother just like, don't ask any questions?
So my siblings, although I was the youngest, they were only a couple of years each older than me. I don't remember them asking questions, but I know my mother didn't say a whole lot at the time. And that was what I remember, is her just saying, "Don't worry about your father, you're not going to see him anymore." And like I said, it broke me. So what I did is I went into this darkness, into this fog that I lived in for many years, depressions and anxieties and these things that I didn't understand. But I do remember even going to school, whatever I was in, first grade, second grade, and the teachers like coming in like, "Are you okay?" Like, because I was just like this. I was in this daze for a really long time. So I know I asked and asked and asked for my father. And I think my mother started to see how broken I was. So she did let me talk to him one time. It's like she let me call him. And it was just so exciting and this big deal to be able to talk to him and my sister, who is my other sibling. But other than that, I don't remember a whole lot of discussions of why or what happened.
Are you able to share the reason why your mother left your dad?
Yeah, absolutely. I didn't learn this till many years later, and I don't blame my mother in any way. I love my mother. I'm very close with her. What my mother told me later on in years was, because she saw that I was broken, and she saw that how it had affected my life, and she said, "I didn't know that it would affect you so much." She goes, "But I was saving you. I was trying to save our family." And it turned out, my dad had a pretty wild lifestyle. I mentioned that I was always with him. He was always home and we'd wrestle and play. Well, it was because he didn't work. and when I didn't know at the age of 7, I didn't know. I just knew I had my daddy around all the time. And I guess he was dealing drugs and he was doing some things he shouldn't have been doing. And one of the stories my mother told me is that the people that he was selling drugs for or with, she was the worker, and she always had a little business. My mother's a little tiny, wonderful woman, raised us, and I love her to death. And she groomed dogs. She had a little grooming shop, and she would groom dogs, and that's how she made a living. But she said that the drug dealers would come to her shop, and they'd take her money. They'd say, "Hey, your husband owes me money," and they'd just take it all, right? So I didn't know any of this stuff was happening. I'm a little boy. I'm with my parents and the whole thing. So she explained this all to me later and said that's why she left. Like she had to. And I understood. And I said, "Oh, wow, like I didn't know that." And I just, I tried to, there's no way to go back and go, "Well, you should have told me or you should have explained it to me." Because at the age of 7, I may still not have understood. It still may have made me mad. You know what I mean? So yeah, that's why she did it. And she did it for the best of us. And who knows what would have happened if we would have stayed in that life.
Well, but you did say that was when you were 7 years old that you left. But then at 9 years old, you started doing drugs.
Yeah.
So how did that happen? Like,
So
how did you get a hold of the drugs?
it's-
You're still in Alaska.
We had come back. We actually
you had
yeah,
already.
we stayed in Alaska for about a year. And part of the traumas, as I talk about childhood trauma, is there's abandonment issues there. And we did come back, and I did get to see my father. But when I came back, the home that we drove away from that day, gone. Toys, car, anything we had, toys and beds and everything was just gone. To this day, I don't know what happened to any of it. But I went to my grandmother's house, and my father met me there, and I got to see him, and I was very excited. It's an emotional thing, my sister and my father. But then he said, "Okay, I got to go, son. Bye," and he left. And I was like I thought at this young age, oh, we're gonna be back,
Yeah.
right? But he left. And I very rarely saw him after that. So what I do remember, and I teach this, right? You asked about the drugs, like how did I start doing drugs? But what I remember, looking back, is my father rolling marijuana joints and doing drugs and stuff. I just didn't know what it was, but I remember him doing it, right? So.
And you were his little helper.
And I was his little helper. Yeah, I was always right there, So, like I said, I didn't know what it was, but how it started is a friend of mine stole a joint. I don't know if they still call it a joint, but stole, marijuana, stole a joint. And back in the 70s, be in mind, it was not like today. It was extremely illegal, right? It was
Right.
hard to find and all that kind of thing. So I remember a friend of mine, same age, he stole a joint from his brother or his older sibling or something. And he came, it was before school, and he knocked on the door. We went to elementary school right across the street, and he went like this. He goes, "Look what I got." And I remember looking at it, and I knew what it was, and I knew what to do with it because of my father. I'd seen it. So I said, "Oh, I know what to do with that." So we got some matches, and we went in the bush, and we started smoking it. And, 9 years old, we're high, and we start drinking and smoking after that just on a regular basis. So I always tell people, be careful what your kids see you doing, saying, acting, because our kids will do what we do, not what we say.
Right.
If we're smoking cigarettes and we say don't smoke cigarettes, they're going to smoke cigarettes. They do
Right.
what we do, not what we
Yes.
say. So that's how it started, because I knew what it was.
Yeah. And so what actually then got you incarcerated?
So I was wild. I was pretty wild out on the streets, ended up in a gang. My mother, who I always say I love her to death, don't blame her for any of this stuff, but she had to work and raise 3 kids on her own, so she was always at work. So after school, we had a lot of freedom. And I was just out in the neighborhood and hanging out with the wrong people who didn't have, their parents around either, and we would do dumb things. And for the most part, the first time I got incarcerated, and most of the time in my very young age, is I had a lot of rage with those frustrations I was telling you about, those energies and things. So I'd get into a lot of fights, right? And I would just do dumb things in the streets and get in fights, and I'd be drunk most of the time. So one day, honestly, I jumped through like somebody's window. There was a fight going on, and I jumped through a window, broke the glass, and just got into this fight with a bunch of other people. And the police came, and I got arrested.
So you got arrested for that, not for drugs.
No, not for drugs.
Were you there a long time or just?
The first time I was there for, I don't know, a week or so. The way I've calculated it, looking at it, between the age of 14, right, that was the first time I got incarcerated, all the way to 24, I was never out of some type of facility for more than 30 days. I looked at the times and the probations and all that kind of thing.
And what was your mother's reaction from you, going to jail, or when she found out that you had been doing drugs?
My mother would say things like, and she would say things like this, and I'll explain. She would say things like, "Do you want to be a loser? Do you want to be a loser?" And I don't mean to insult anybody by saying this, but she would say, "Do you want to be a loser? Do you want to work at a gas station all your life?" I mean, there were different types of way of looking at things, and she always meant best. Like she was trying to get me to get out of that lifestyle, right?
Right. Painting a picture of
what
something
could be,
bad.
Yeah, and being young and getting incarcerated so often, she would say, "Do you want to go to prison? Because people in prison are losers." That's what she would say. They call them losers, and they get out and they can't get a job and they have to work in gas stations. And she would tell me stuff like that. So, funny enough, years when I ended up in prison, I remember thinking like, "Oh man, I'm a loser." Like that's what my mother told me this whole time. And then even getting out of prison, I remember one time I was going to go apply. I was applying for jobs. But I would not apply at a gas station just because she had said that over and over. I go, "I'm not going to work at a gas station." But it's all psychological. Man, if gas stations pay good money, then work at a gas station. Do what you got to do.
Right. So you say you became a father at 13. So how did that happen?
How did it happen?
I mean, no, well,
I know what you mean. I know what you mean.
like,
Yeah. How did it come about?
yeah.
So the same way I was on the streets because my mother was out working all the time, doing her job, running her business. And the same guys I hung around with that didn't have their parents around, I met a girl who didn't have her mother
Yeah.
around. Single mom
Okay.
who always worked. And after school,
How old was she?
she was,
Were you
I
both
was
young?
13 and she's 2 years older than me. So 13, 14,
Oh,
15. So
wow.
she was 15. She got pregnant when I was 13 and she was 15. And then it's the April, May, June, July. 3 months after I turned 14, he was born. And then so she had just turned 16 when he was born.
And what happened with the baby? Like,
No, he's my son. He's 40 years old now. He's gonna be 41 this year.
so at that time, her parents took care of her and the baby?
She lived with her and her mom. And then she has, I think, 4 sisters. And, talk about like a link, a chain, like all of her sisters had kids very young, very similar, right? And so there was a lot of family involved in helping and so on and so forth. But she did live with her mother.
What kind of advice did you get from your mom when that happened?
So advice, what I remember is I didn't tell her for a very long time. I think she was already 8 months or close to delivery. And her family kept telling me, you need to tell your mom. You need to tell your mom. And I was like, I will. And you need to tell your mom. But honestly, I was so young. Like when I was 13, we were in junior high school.
Yeah.
And I remember walking on the school grounds and she was on a payphone. Back then there were payphones on the school grounds. And she got off the phone and she walked over to me and she goes, I'm pregnant. At 13, I didn't really understand the impact. I honestly, I just looked at her and I said, oh, okay. I said, okay. So, but I didn't tell my mother because, there was a sense it was a big deal. So 8 months in, her sister called my mother. And I was lost already. I was in the streets and, like I said, drugs and partying and everything else. And I happened to be a couple blocks away from where I lived. And I don't even know how she got the number. There were no cell phones or stuff. But she was able to call me there. And she called me and she said, get home right now. And my mother, she's never like hit me. She yelled once in a while, but she never really used an authoritarian voice with me. So when she said, you get home now, like there was something wrong. I was like, oh man. So I ran home, right? I ran home.
You had no clue?
Yeah, I had no idea. I had no idea. So I ran home and I walked in the door and she's standing there and, she looks at me, she goes, and I won't say her name, but she says, is she pregnant? And I just looked at her and she says, is she pregnant? And I said, yeah, she's pregnant. And she goes, what are you gonna do? I remember she said that, she goes, what are you gonna do? And I looked at her like, I have no idea.
yeah,
like I'm 13 years old, like I have no idea what I'm gonna do, And then she's like, oh my God, you have no idea, and this and that. And then at that point, and she had known my girlfriend, but just hadn't seen her in a while because she was pregnant. So she came over and she actually stayed with us for a little while too through that. So between my mother and her mother, everybody helped.
So your families kind of accepted it and
Yeah.
helped.
Well, honestly, in the very beginning, when her mother first found out, she told her to leave. She told her to leave. And I think actually, yes, she went to her sister's house at that point for a while. But then it wasn't long, a couple of weeks or so, and her mom said, okay, come back. Like, I get it, right? And then my mom, I mean, what could you do?
Yeah.
She's 8 months pregnant, right? She's like, you should have told me.
So what happened after that? Did you take care of the baby or did she raise the baby because then did you go back to jail again?
Yeah, I started getting incarcerated. So let's see, it wasn't too long after he was born that I got incarcerated, and I was in and out, and I was lost. I was lost in the streets, just doing my own thing. And I would come and see him, but not enough, because I do remember my mother telling me, like, you need to go see your son. You need to go see your son, right? And I remember one time, some things that we're told as kids or even adults, like, are just like a punch, and they sink in. And I remember one time my mom said, I said, why? Because she kept telling me I got to go see him. And I said, why? I never see my dad. And she goes, and how do you feel about that? And I just like looked at her and I said, yeah. I said, okay. So I would go see him, definitely not as much as I should have, but I was always in and out. There was this time where, maybe I saw him once or twice a year. And then as he got a little bit older and I started to mature, then I made it a point. He actually came and lived with me for a while. So it was, yeah.
Wow. So your siblings were watching you going through all of this. Were they on good paths? Were they good in school? Were they doing everything right, or were they also kind of involved in the same things that you were?
My brother was on a good path. He was a teenager, did his own thing, stuff that he did, but he wasn't getting incarcerated and all that kind of stuff like I wasn't anyway. He didn't get involved in gangs. My sister, very similar to the life that I was living. She's pretty wild herself, and she ended up actually moving out of the house at like 16, very young. She moved out and she was having kids and the whole thing, and she kind of just disappeared. So it was mainly me and my brother. And he just did his own thing. He wasn't living like I was. But he would tell me once in a while, I remember, 'cause he's my older brother, and he would come and be like, dude, what's wrong with you? Like, what are you doing? Like, what's wrong with you? And I would just be like, yeah, whatever, just leave me alone.
Was there something that happened in when you were incarcerated? Did anything happen that made you change or want to change your lifestyle?
Yeah, I always had those questions that I had mentioned. Why do I do what I do? Because I did a lot of dumb things. I was incarcerated all the time. Why do I act the way that I act? Because I had this persona of this cool gang kid and this and that. And, when you're young, the girls like bad boys, unfortunately, right? So that gave me more like significance per se. And I would, had these girlfriends and gang and all this stuff. But why do I do what I do? Why do I act? Because I acted that way. But inside, the last one was, why do I feel the way that I feel? But inside, I felt just darkness, really sad and down all the time, depressed. And I always had this mask on, like I was this cool guy. So asking, always asking those questions was part of what helped me shift and change. But at some point, I realized that I would have these visions, and I didn't know at the time that they were from God, but they were visions from God showing me things like how He was with me, and He was saving me from times where I could have been killed, or I could have done something worse than I had been doing and been in life in prison.
What was the longest time that you were in jail?
2 years for one stretch. Other than that, it was like I did a year, 6 months, 8 months, things like that.
Okay. And you mentioned that you went to church when you were little, right? Mm-hmm. So tell me about the first time you went to church and what your mother said.
Yeah, the first real memory of church is taking me into the kids section, right? And I'm little, I might be 5 or 6, and screaming and crying because I didn't want to be in there. And then my mother pulls me out. I was like, come on. So she brings me out to the chairs. And I remember sitting there watching, listening, not knowing really what it was. And I kind of looked at her and I said, Mom, what is this place? Like, what is this? She goes, oh, this is church. And I said, what is it for? And she basically said, when you have a problem, you come and you talk to Jesus, and Jesus will help you. And I remember that, very young. That's what she said, and that kind of planted the seed of who God and who Jesus is for us.
Do you believe that from back when you were little, God somehow had a hand upon your life? I guess.
Yeah.
Yes, because you said that you could have been dead or gotten into trouble.
God absolutely
with you.
had a hand in my life. Even though I didn't know, God always did. I always had this call. So in between all these times I was getting in trouble and everything else, lostness and everything I was doing, I would go to church on and off. And I remember I found this program. I don't know, it was a program, it was a church, but they would go to the schools and they would do church at these schools, like after school or something. Oh. And I went one time, and and I was there with.
When in the 80s?
This was in the 80s. Yeah, in the 80s. And I went, and I went with a bunch of my homeboys per se, right, back in those days. And they all, this is stupid, and left. But I stayed. And I talked to a guy, one of the younger guys there too. He was part of the church, and he would pick me up and he'd take me to church. And he'd pick me up and he'd take me to church. And I learned a lot just listening. One of the things, like I was saying, we pick things out, or things are said that stick with us. And one of the things he said, he goes, a lot of people think that you have to change to come to church. Like you can't do this and you can't do this and you can't do that. He said, but that's not the truth. He says, if you come and you build a relationship with God and you believe, he said, you won't want to do those things anymore. So don't come here and try and be perfect. Come here and learn and listen and build a relationship with God. And those things will go away. And I remember him saying that. Like, it's another thing that kind of got planted. And I said, oh, okay, that makes sense, But I continued to live the life that I was living until later on in my life.
We're almost at the end of this program. I think we're going to have to do a part 2 because
there's so much
more.
I
want you to share more practical things of what you share in your book and what you learned and what happened after you actually started making that transformation in your life.
Yeah.
But before we go, what would be something that you would share with young people that probably know that they're not on the right path, or even parents? I don't know if they'll be watching, but
Yeah.
parents that maybe have kids that are not doing good. But what kind of advice would you give them?
So one of the most important things that I've learned and that I teach is understanding and expressing your emotions, right? I always explain to people emotions is energy in motion. So our emotions are an energy, right? If you're happy and you're joyful, you're celebrating, right? You're releasing this energy without realizing that it's an energy. But a lot of times when we get upset or we're angered by something, we hold it in. Like, oh, I got pissed off, I'm mad now, I'm angry. So we hold it in. And I always do this and say, what happens if you compress energy? At some point, it's going to explode. So that's why a lot of us, kids, adults, whatever it is, we're so quick to anger. We're just filled with this negative energy that we're holding in. So when something happens, even just as easy as passing somebody on the road, they go all crazy and honking and the whole thing, because they're just filled with all this negative energy. So what I always say is to be aware and understand that you can express this anger. You don't have to yell and scream, but you can go, oh, I didn't like that. I don't appreciate that. What did you mean by that? And even if you don't say it to the person or to whatever the situation is, talk to somebody about it, because you're releasing what it is, even if it's bothersome to you, but it'll release all that darkness, that energy
Instead
you're
of
carrying.
holding it in until you
Yeah, and that's the key. That's the key. And the second thing, and we can touch on it in the next episode, is self-awareness. It's very important to be self-aware, know how to express your emotions, and parents should teach your kids this. Most adults don't even understand that, but parents need to teach your kids how to express themselves and allow them to express themselves.
Great. I have a question for you. Is there something, before we go in this last few seconds, that we haven't talked about that you probably want to share on our next episode so that they can tune in?
Yeah, well, I'll tell you, I did have the big change for me came after college. We'll talk a little bit about college and how I learned the science of the mind and the body. But the big change came when God actually put me in a vision and showed me that I had a childhood trauma, literally.
Yeah.
I was out of my body and sitting there, standing there, and I saw myself as a child, and he explained it to me. So that will be something you want to hear.
So you don't want to miss our part 2, where we're going to talk about that vision that Raul had and how that completely transformed his life and helped him to overcome his childhood traumas.